And welcome to Harvard Hillel and to the South Sea Hall. I'm Jim Steinberg, and I have the great pleasure of being the director of Harvard Hillel and one of the rabbis here. And it's tremendous to welcome friends. Let me introduce someone we'll hear from later this evening. Elisa New is the Powell M. Cabot Professor of American Literature, and her fields of expertise are not just American poetry and literature, but also religion and literature, and she takes a special interest in Jewish literature, and her work includes The Lion's Eye, Poetic Experience, American Sight, and The Regenerate Lyric, Theology and Innovation in American Poetry. And I think you'll see in just a moment why that makes Lisa a perfect interlocutor for this evening. Alicia Jo Rabins is, among other things, a wonderful friend. We met years ago in Limud in England, and ever since have kept in touch. And I have to say that when one comes across an artist who really helps one see one's own tradition and the world and oneself in new ways, that's something really special, and that's how I think of Alicia. And Alicia's joined by her partner in life and in music, Aaron Hartman, whom we also welcome. About Alicia, I can say that she is a writer, a composer, a performer, and a Torah scholar. I can attest to all of those things, and that her book, Divinity School, just won this year's American Poetry Review Honickman First Book Prize. And she tours internationally with the songs that you're about to hear, and also with an amazing rock opera called A Kaddish for Bernie Madoff that I think we should bring to Harvard in partnership with our economics department at some later stage. So without further ado, Alicia and Aaron and Girls in Trouble.
Thanks, Jonah, and thanks so much for having us here. We're going to just start with some music, and I will talk more later. Ready? Okay. All right. I'll show you what you have. The pearl inside the oyster of your heart. I've seen the bones rise from the river. I've watched them shining in the dark. Find the one you love. I know him and he's looking for you too. The waters parted, but it wasn't like they said. No iron wall came down to hold them. like mine, touching all the hidden walls of time. Thank you. So the name of this project is Girls in Trouble, which is obviously not like a totally accurate description of who's standing on this stage. But the girls in the name are not me or Aaron, but they're actually the women of the Torah. And often when we play in rock clubs, I leave this whole little speech out, and I allow people to think that maybe my life is extremely fascinating. But actually, all these songs are in some way about my life, but also are based on a different story. Each song is a different story of a woman from Torah. And that first one was a very obscure one named Serach Bat Asher. Does anyone else know her here? Yeah. And this next one is a quite famous one named Miriam. And Miriam, is beloved for leading the song at the sea, and rightly so. But the trouble in Girls in Trouble is that I am drawn to the darker moments in these characters' stories, often because, in a religious setting, people aren't necessarily wanting to focus on that darker side of life. But I find actually a lot of power and compassion in the fact that these stories reflect the complexity of our lives. And so I wanted to look directly at the moments in their stories that are more challenging, more complicated, and to me, often more relatable. So this is about a moment later in Miriam's life when she's led the people through the desert. She's watched over her brother Moses, but she and her brother Aaron criticize their brother Moses, and God gets very angry and strikes only Miriam with leprosy. She's exiled from the community basically for a week to sort of purify herself, and then they wait for her and she rejoins them. And I wanted to enter into that moment when she's out in the desert alone and imagine what she might have been feeling at the end of this life of leadership when she ends up in this strange kind of enforced meditation retreat. So this song is called Snow, Scorpions, and Spiders. Well, my mother named me bitter, although as a child I was so kind, hiding myself in the reeds to watch over my brother. But still my name was bitter, bitter the taste of the sea, bitter the cries of the horses drowning behind us. If anybody had asked me, I might not have chosen to go. But everyone knows sometimes you don't have a choice. So when he said, you're banished 7 days in the desert alone, I just started walking. I scorpions and the spiders crawled up to me and stopped in my shade. Together in silence we watched as the sun crossed the sky. Spit in your face, wouldn't you want to leave that place? And if your skin should turn to snow, wouldn't you have to go? And if your God should turn from you, wouldn't you turn too? Still I don't regret a minute, and I don't regret an hour of the week that I lived all alone on the top of the mountain. Though no voice came down from heaven, and I never saw words written in fire, I did see the birds of prey pick all the carcasses clean. If anybody had asked me, I might not have chosen to go. But everyone knows sometimes you don't have a choice. And if your father spit in your face, wouldn't you want to leave that place? And if your skin should turn to snow, wouldn't you have to go? And if your God should turn from you, wouldn't you turn too? Thank you. This next song is about Sarah, who is pretty famous from Genesis, but there is a moment in her life that is famous but not from her perspective, and that's the moment of Abraham, her husband, taking their son Isaac up the mountain to ostensibly sacrifice him. And there's nothing really written in the Torah about Sarah's experience of this, but the next thing that happens in the Torah is actually that she dies. And so the rabbis, observe that juxtaposition and sort of insert some rabbinic fanfic into the gap, which is called midrash, a great form of literature invented by the rabbis, I think. And they say, well, actually, maybe Sarah saw what was going on because the trickster figure of Satan, who later turns into Satan, Satan showed her this sort of movie projection of what was happening, but being Satan, he stopped it before the dramatic rescue of Isaac. So I thought this story was so horrifically dark and twisted that it really needed a song. And I thought, what genre would really, fully match this gothic tale? So I settled on the Southern bluegrass murder ballad form. And this is on our new album, which is called Open the Ground. Well, I went down to the river so wide, Satan was standing on the other side. He said to me, look and see, I saw you with our only child, with a knife in your hand and your eyes so wild, on the mountaintop. That's supposed to be funny. and the vision stopped. But I like it that you're laughing. Oh. I can't see his face. All these years I've been a faithful wife, and I gave you a child so late in my life. My time was done when I bore you a son. Thanks. I have a previous life as an Appalachian fiddler, as a few of you know, and so I can try to work that in wherever I can. And on the album, there's actually my amazing bluegrass friend from New York played some mandolin on that. So normally while I'm tuning, I have to make up some banter and try to talk while I tune, but since this is a joint album release celebration and book publication celebration, I get to read some poems, and Erin's going to tune for me. Thank you, Erin. Sure. So this is my book, Divinity School, which came out in September, and it's sort of about where the very earthly and the very supernatural intersect. So I'm going to start with probably the most mystical, out there one in terms of its content, and it's called Malchut, this poem, which was originally the title of the book, but my editor was like, a little hard to say. So yeah, this poem's called Malchut, and it starts with a little epigram from R.A. Kaplan, who writes, "That which defines space can stand aloof from space. That which defines time, on the other hand, cannot remain apart from it. The field of time stands up and grows a face. Arms sprout from his side, wings from the arms, blue mouth burning between the feathers. The field of time changes the air around him as a sunken pothole changes the road, as a flaming tree illuminates the yard. Then takes a brush and begins to sketch us, double helix paint on a canvas of cells." This next one is from a series of how-to poems I wouldn't necessarily recommend following my advice in these because they're a little bit surreal. It's a form I borrowed from, I think, Yoko Ono does it, Julio Cortázar does it, and I think the rabbis of the Mishnah do it a little bit. So this is called How to Travel. Sometimes you see the leaves as birds who have traveled all night and come to rest at dawn. Sometimes you feel the space between molecules of honey. Sometimes you are at the airport. Sometimes you are at the hospital. You find your seat an hour before sunrise and watch polar bears swim slowly underwater through the glass. Oh, immigration, oh, fluorescent lights, the surgeon's rubber gloves, brush tips of death against your cheek. This country stamps your passport and hands it back forever changed. I'm going to read two more before we return to the music portion of the evening. There's some crossover between my poems and my music that's quite explicit, and this is one of those where I'm taking a biblical story and sort of interrogating it. This is called The Story of Noah, and it uses this word sohar, which is sort of a mysterious Hebrew word that doesn't really appear anywhere else in Torah in that form, but the Torah says that there was one of them in the ark, and the rabbis argue about what that means, so that argument works its way into the poem. The story of Noah. What was it like building an ark and leaving some things on the side? Who watched him pull away from the shore that used to be his hillside rooftop? He was careful not to think about those eyes too much, those babies. In the cabin, a raven and a dove slept side by side with branches in their beaks. His wife was pleasant. His 3 sons and their wives were pleasant. The sound of rain, the sound of rain, the sound of rain on all sides lulled like the sides of sleep, tugging him down. But when the rain stopped being a reason. In the wooden wall of the ark was its sohar. This was A, a window, B, a glowing precious stone, C, we don't know. Noah looked up and saw. In the wooden wall of Noah, there was also a sohar. Sometimes the voice of God would come through and blind everyone in the ark, bouncing against the sides until it found its way back out to hover over the water. At a certain point, this all became unbearable. The light, the raven and the dove, his sons, their wives, and the sense that the sea outside was boiling. And so he flung the stone into the water. And so when Noah let all the birds go, Noah was letting Noah go. He flew out of his own sohar, away from his wife and ark, away from all the people who died because he did not save them, away from the years lost to rain and slumber. I want to know what happened then. And the last one that I will read before we play more music, and I'll read a couple more later. Oh, I thought it might be nice since we're at a school to read How to Graduate. God wrote me a letter in invisible ink, but I got overwhelmed. The parchment, the lemon juice, the light, and the candle, I accidentally set it on fire. For 40 days and nights, the smell of caramel surrounded me, and when it receded, I sent out my only dove. All right, not lose my place. Ready for some more? Okay. How are you guys doing? You look good. I can see you much better than I can usually see audiences. It's kind of rare that it's like completely illuminated, but you're beautiful, so it's good. I'm happy. This is a song about Lilith, who has a pretty complicated history, sort of legendarily imagined by the rabbis as the first Eve, who was created sort of 50% of a whole with Adam, and then they were split apart. And so she got the idea that maybe she was even with him, and she started to assert herself and Adam went and complained to God and was like, how am I supposed to live like this? And God was like, you're right, that's horrible, I'm sorry. And banished Lilith, and then created Eve out of Adam's side or ribs so that Eve would always know her place. And Lilith got a very bad rap for probably like 2,000 years. People wore amulets against her. She would come and kill babies and all this stuff. And then in the 70s, she got reclaimed as a feminist icon. And now she has a magazine and she has a music fair. And I wanted to write this song for her. And I thought maybe she and Adam, really had what it took to make a good partnership, but they were just like way too early. The world was not ready for that kind of equal partnership. So this is a love song for Lilith, and it's called We Are Androgynous. Double-faced beings, one looking forward and one looking back, formed in the light of the throne in the sky. We are never alone and we never die. Guide us and shape us until we are ready to walk away. Thanks. Is anyone wondering, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say I hope it's in tune.
I hope it's in tune, too.
I tuned under duress.
Okay. You did? Sorry.
No.
Okay.
We'll see.
We can work that out later. Okay. Is anyone wondering, I was going to say, is anyone wondering what this thing is that I'm stepping on here? Should I explain it? Okay, so this is called the loop pedal. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's magical technology that in the 70s, when Lilith first got reclaimed, would have been like a giant tape loop. And now it's just a little tiny computer, and I step on it to record what I'm playing, step on it again to play it back, and I can record layers and layers, even of vocals. And it's quite empowering for someone who plays, a stringed instrument, which really it's hard to build textures with one violin. So I'm really psyched that loop pedals exist. This next song is from the new album, and they're in the back. There's a table. We have all 3 albums. There's sort of a trilogy now of songs about women in Torah, and this is a new one, and it's called "Of Meeting in the Night." And so we are now based in Portland, Oregon, as of 3 years ago, and for many, many, many years before that, I lived in Brooklyn. So this is a song. It's based on the character of Lot's wife, who just couldn't keep herself from looking back, and it's about nostalgia and leaving a city that you love. Of meeting in the night and parting after day, of early morning light to wash our sins away, of glasses raised and emptied, and of corners in the dark, of drawing back our arrows and of aiming at the mark, of windows that don't open and doors that never close, of putting on our costumes and taking off our clothes, of falling in and falling out and falling in again, and dancing at the minarets till 2:30 a.m. Farewell, farewell, I loved you well, but now it's time to part. And though we made a kind of hell, to leave you breaks my heart. For who were you and who was I, and where did we both go? If I could have just one more night, maybe I could know. Thank you. Okay, Aaron's going to tune once more. I guess, well, you accept it, so not under duress. No duress. And I'm going to read a few more poems while he does. And then we'll close with a couple songs. Has anyone here been to the New York Earth Room? It's an installation in Soho by the artist Walter de Maria. You basically, you walk in, and it's just this a huge expanse. You're in a Soho loft. It's like in a gallery, but the whole gallery is just filled with earth, with soil. And there's this guy whose job is to take care of it and make sure no one plants stuff in it or something. I don't know. And it's a really incredible space to wander into in the middle of New York City. So this is a poem that I wrote for the guy who takes care of the Earth Room. It's called "The Man in the Earth Room." The man in the earth room takes care of the earth room. He tends the soft brown, the soft soil, the soft, beautiful brown soil, where I am eager to lie down, and for the first time I do not fear it. I once lived on a street far away from here called Rehov Shabazi. It featured the usual ball playing, etc., but also a rust, which seemed to signify rusted squares tacked onto the sides of buildings like an industrial quilt, buildings full of small children eating and singing and riding tricycles around the balconies. Why am I telling you this? It seemed to signify ancientness. I don't know, it felt like a clue, something you might need to know later on, that the darkest brown of that rust, not the reddish end, not the continuum between red and brown, but the single darkest spots were the same as the brown of the earth room, as the brown eyes of the earth room's caretaker. He would let you in if it was your birthday, even if it were not technically a day the earth room was open. Because when the city fogs over, locks you out, and you are stuck wandering around downtown, you can come in and breathe the quiet expanse of crumbly, dark brown earth, the quiet expanse of your own eventual grave. Meanwhile, the caretaker eats his soup behind the white privacy wall. And do you know why angels eat soup? Because it does not crunch. Soup is another one of those hints of the afterlife, scattered like blossoms through this mess of days. Every once in a while, I try to gather an armful of them and lay them on the desk of the caretaker as a gift when he is not looking, although I know he sees me, whether he is looking or not. So, 10 years later, I decided to send him that poem because, I don't know, I just was like, I wrote this whole poem about this guy, maybe he's still there. So in lieu of a letter to go with it, I wrote him another poem, and I never, ever, ever, ever thought it would be published, but here it is in my book, so I'm going to read it to you. It's called Dear Earthroom Man. I am finally mailing you the letter I wrote you 10 years ago when I breathed in the earth room. There's a privilege to marriage and a privilege to being 26 and single. I've seen it a dozen times, that flowering. It happened to me, dear Earthroom Man. You don't know me, but I've been thinking about you for 10 years. Ever since that day with Jen, halfway between our birthdays, when I wasn't afraid of death for the first time. In your presence, burial felt like a soft brown flower, a wedding dress I would wear one day, if I was lucky. And if that's true, we're all lucky, Earthroom Man. In that letter, I said you were an angel, but I know that was my imagination. You are a man at a desk, like any other. But beside the desk is a room full of brown earth. And I think you've grown wise from that, day after day, breathing in the earth room. And today I'm sending you 2 letters, 10 years apart. Have you ever? I hope you have. I hope you have a good life. I've been thinking of you. So I wrote that, and I printed it out, and I wrote my email address on the bottom because I was like, sending a letter back is sort of a lot to ask when this creepy person is mailing you poems about you. And a couple weeks later, I got an email from him, and he was basically like, "I'm fine. Are you okay?" But we're on this tour, and we went through New York, and I have this book now, and so I actually, we have a 1 and a 3-year-old, and so I walked across the Williamsburg Bridge with our 1-year-old strapped to my chest, and I, gave him the book and said, "Remember that weird, creepy person who wrote you those poems? Here they are." And he was really nice about it. I'm going to read one last poem, and then we'll close with a couple songs. This is another from the How To series, and it's called How to Assess Your Net Worth. I confess to completely stealing the content from a Hasidic writing, but I did make up the title, and I did credit the Hasidic teaching in the back of the book. So, how to assess your net worth. Take 2 small pieces of paper. On one, write, "The world was created for me." On the other, "I am only dust and ashes." Put one in each pocket. Never leave the house without them. Thanks. So because I'm a musician, I couldn't really go on even a book tour without merch. So I had these, you can hear me if I don't. I had these scarves made, silkscreen, and one side says, "The world was created for me," and the other side says, "I am only dust and ashes." And we have them in the back with our CDs and my books for sale if anyone's like chilly and needs a little ego balancing help.
In the summer we do it as bathing suits.
Okay, so we're going to close with two songs, and this next to last song is about the character of Hagar, and I'm playing it in the name of peace. And I imagine there's a legend that Hagar, who ends up being, Abraham's sort of handmaiden and not in a position of a lot of power, but there's a midrash, a legend that she was actually a princess in Egypt. And so I thought of her story as a bit of a fairy tale. So this is called The Arrow and the Bow.
The arrow leaves the bow and goes off on its own, and when the arrow's gone, the bow remains alone. My little grain of rice, my little blue fig, my pear, my orange, how you grew in me. Ooh, my father said to me as I was leaving home, a princess never cries, even when she's alone. So I'll be over here and you stay over there as long as we both breathe.
Thank you. We're going to play one more song, so wait, don't use it all up. Don't use it all up. Unless you're saying we shouldn't. Can we play one more song? Is that okay? Yeah? Will you sing with me? Do you sing at Harvard? Do people? Yeah? So back to my Appalachian fiddling roots. This is a song called More Than Rubies, and it's a love song, and the chorus is what you are heartily invited to sing with me on, and the chorus goes, more than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. And if there's any of those like a cappella type people, feel free to harmonize. So let's just try it once. That more than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. Oh my God, there are. Thank you. Beautiful. That comes back at the end of each verse. So. Like a merchant ship, strong and wide, golden oranges deep inside, more than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. With purple silk and tapestry, she weaves a blanket to cover me. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. The world is woven through us, and I cannot forget how her fingers hold the thread. She buys a field, she plants a vine. Come the autumn, she makes her wine. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. Let it rain, oh let it storm. She keeps her baby safe and warm. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. Grace can lie and beauty's vain. Oh, but she calls me by my name. More than rubies, more than pearls, the one I love. The world is woven through us. I swear I won't forget how her fingers hold the I'm Alicia Jo Rabins. Thank you so much. What a beautiful evening with you guys. Thanks. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you to all of our partners for this event. And I'm so excited to talk to you now. Can I say one thing that I forgot to say before we start talking? Which is just, I just want to say, if you're educator-y types, I'm writing a curriculum about using these songs for teens and adults. So feel free to find me online if you want to have access to that while I'm still writing it. And if you need to leave early, feel free to also stop by and sign the mailing list or purchase anything from Erin on the way out. And now we're going to get a chance to do some talking, which I'm excited about.
Well, that was so wonderful. So lovely and funny and smart. Go on. All those. And warm. Full of that connubial communication. You asked for it. I did. You did great. I have the happy task of asking you about your wonderful book, Divinity School, that I've been reading and then listening to your music in my car, and so I've been thinking about you for a few months. And one thing that struck me is that even as you draw on Jewish traditions, and you do draw on Jewish traditions and women of the Torah, on the Mishnah, you write Midrash, or you bring the Midrashim of the rabbis in. It's a big, eclectic spiritual world that you, just as it's a big, syncretistic, eclectic musical world that you draw on. Not an entirely monotheistic world, even, we might say.
True, I confess.
I mean, just for those of you who haven't yet read the book that's back there, Alicia has this marvelous poem, a very funny one, that's called Invocation to Charlotte, Goddess of the Tarmac, which turns out to be a plea for the goddess to come and get them off the tarmac, right, where she's stuck on a plane. The title poem of the book, Divinity School, has as its speaker a guy in a monastery, right? So I'm wondering if you could just reflect a little bit on your Judaism and how you think of these other traditions and how they fertilize that or teach you more about that or help you find a place outside of that. What is it?
Yeah. That's a great question. There was a really lovely article in the Harvard Gazette where the interviewer got straight to the heart of that too. And I mean, essentially, I grew up in a Jewish family, but a pretty secular Jewish family. And being sort of going to Hebrew school occasionally across town, but feeling like that was a different world. And we lived in a very non-Jewish suburb of Baltimore, so there were not really Jews around me in my everyday life. And then occasionally we would go to what we called temple, and I would feel this complicated sense of holiness and confusion. And there was a church organ because it was Reform, and so it was a lot of just wasn't a very clear upbringing in some ways spiritually. I mean, I had an amazing upbringing, and I'm very grateful to my parents for that. But it's the typical sort of highly Orthodox people came to this country, and their kids were wanted no part of that, and that was my grandparents. Mm-hmm. So my parents already grew up in secular homes, but I had this spiritual hunger, which I now can look back and be like, oh, oops. Now I look back and I'm like, well, that's why I was creating weird rituals with weeds from the yard and crystals,
yeah, that kind of thing. That's what I wanted you to talk about.
I'm sort of into witchy stuff, and but I also was like, what does it mean that I'm Jewish, especially growing up in a context where it was not a cultural thing. I think in many ways I was raised in a culturally Protestant situation, but religiously Jewish. So then I went to, I did have a bat mitzvah, and that was about it. And then I went to Barnard, and I I would notice these girls in long skirts who would, like on certain days, they would wait for me to walk through the automatic doors of our dorm first. I was like, what is going on? And finally I asked someone about it, and they were like, oh, they're Orthodox, and they can't use electricity on Shabbat, and so they need someone else to make the doors open. I was like, that's really weird. And I said this, and this was actually in the article, but I was really immediately struck by the idea that a religious law from this ancient tradition could result in this bizarre kind of performance art moment in their lives, like every Saturday. And it really captivated me, and I wanted to know more. So after I graduated, I went to Jerusalem, and I sort of immersed myself in Jewish texts at a place called Pardes, which it was important to me that it be co-ed, and I didn't have to like abandon my feminism to go. And I thought it would be 1 year, and then I would go back to my normal life, but it grew into 2 years of sort of complete immersion in the day, and then at night I would go out and play in like these rock clubs with Israeli bands. And so for a while I really kind of took on religious Judaism as my sole spiritual tradition, but a lot of Buddhism and yoga practice like soon started to creep in, just addressing spiritual needs that I wasn't finding met by the kind of Jewish practice that I was doing, or just aspects of existence. And so I've sort of like developed, the ecumenical, Jewishly rooted, but also pretty diverse library of spiritual techniques and practices and ideas that I just carry with me in my head, and I'm always adding to them too.
Yeah, and ritual is very important.
It is.
I was glad you mentioned those weeds in the yard and the crystals, because there is even though your poems are rooted often in very everyday activities like reading the Sunday New York Times, there's an awe, an elevation, a sense of formality that often guides the voice, right? As though ritual is important. And even the how-to poems, how to do this, how to do that, I have a whole list of them. They include how to tell time, how to travel, how to cross-country ski, how to be a prophet, how to make a girl come, how to confess an affair. How-to poems they say, do this.
Yeah, and I think that stems for me from that same fascination of like, how could an ancient law reflect in this extremely physical, in-the-moment practice of like waiting in front of an electronic door on like 116th and Broadway,
So what is that? Is that related to is there something about the communal signaling, the personal satisfaction, that act of communication that enters your poetry? Is there? I'm just thinking about the role of ritual for you.
Well, there's a couple things. I think one is that I'm fascinated. I think if I had to say in one word the theme of my book, it would be time, which I find endlessly psychedelic and fascinating, just living in time. And I think that religious texts and rituals are a way that humans can talk to each other beyond death. I think it might be a form of immortality, actually. That I can read the words of some rabbi from the 3rd century and apply them in my daily life, and that never loses its fascination for me.
And that accounts for a certain ancientness in the voice of your poetry that issues, even though we know you're a woman of the 21st century, you're kind of a badass, which is another part of the voice. That there's an ancientness that you want to pass through.
There is
your language.
I think that what I mull over in language is what I mull over in my own life. In a lot of ways, it expresses the things I'm always thinking about, and I find ritual in everything. And I think that the division of sort of like this worldly quotidian daily life and pageantry is to me very blurry. So I think about something like online dating, which seems like the furthest thing from the rabbis of the Talmud, or a spiritual tradition. But it is. The rabbis of the Talmud had a lot to say about finding your mate, and if you look at it from above, it's like all these people looking at the screen, scrolling through and thinking like, is this person my mate? Is this person my mate? I mean, it's being a little generous. I think they're all looking for mates, but like, you know what I mean?
This way, going that way.
Yeah. They're all doing like this like amazing like dance. And in the moment it's like cell phones and texting and corners and who's going to pay and these really nitty-gritty details. But I guess I've always sort of had this thing in my brain where I can flip it and be like, this is an ancient thing that's happening here, and act of flipping is really fun for me. So I do that a lot in the book.
And if you don't mind, would you mind if I read
No,
one
I
of these
don't.
poems? So one of my favorites that's about time and time travel, and there are many of them in this book, and they're kind of trippy. We're going to go back to badass in a minute. Just duly warning you. This poem's called How to Sail. Scrape the curse off the parchment. Stir the broken letters into a jar of water. Make a woman drink it. Thus said Elohim. But why? Thus said Molly, 12 years old. Now I was the teacher. We sat there, two black flames in a room of white fire. We were sailing on a wind that passed through the open window of a room next to the marketplace 2,000 years ago. Right? That wind came from there. And so the illogic of it is even better, right? The strange, archaic thing, the more archaic, the more it brings the breath of the ancient.
Yeah, I mean, on a literal level, that I tutor bar and bat mitzvah students, and like I had 3 different years where I had a 12-year-old girl who I had to be like, here's the story of the woman accused of adultery, who has to like scrape the letters off, the priest scrapes the letters off the scroll and mixes it with dirt from the floor, and she has to drink it and see if these horrible physical things happen to her. And so, like balancing, the ancient aspect of like this mentorship from generation to generation, but then the bizarre content that I was actually talking about with them, and the sacredness of like a 12-year-old woman and me, young woman, and me like getting to wrestle with those words. And how was that happening 2,000 years ago when women weren't studying the same way, but I'm sure they were grappling.
Yes, but I did notice, and you all probably heard it, even though it's maybe the first time you've heard the poem, the way Molly plays off Elohim, right?
I never noticed that.
Right, I mean, there's, sort of the sublimity and the largeness of Elohim, and then there's Molly.
Oh, yeah, I thought you meant like the word, which I just realized when you said that, like Elohim and Molly are all like the same letter sounds?
Yeah,
oh,
no, that's what I meant.
I did not notice that.
Yeah, the letter sounds, and so we come from the sublime to the earth, just as we come from the ancient to the present, and the heaven and earth thing that you began with. So I do want to go back for a minute to Girls in Trouble, and you said that you are attracted to those moments in the Torah where terrible things are happening, and when one reads the Torah, it's such a powerful text because our sorrows, our traumas, are all, seem to be secreted there. But there's also in your work a kind of girls in trouble, girls on the, girls gunning a motorcycle across the Brooklyn. There's a girls in a leather jacket. There's a particular, and I may be over-identifying, there's a kind of Jewish womanhood that one wants to discover in these texts that isn't so law-abiding, right? And in dialogue with a fascination with the law, with ritual, with the past, and this is in this poetry and in the fact that you stand here, with a bass player, there's this talking back to girls and that's the play of Girls in Trouble, right? We are in trouble in a good way.
Absolutely. I hope so. Yeah.
So I guess maybe that wasn't, what can I ask you to say about, is there a sort of rebellion, you weren't raised in a household that made you feel restive and controlled, Jewishly.
No.
So that this isn't rebelliousness that's
Oh, it was very rebellious of me to go to Jerusalem.
Oh, that
immerse
was
myself in
rebellious.
Jewish texts. They were like, "What are you doing? Oh my God!" Yeah, that was like a big issue, actually. But no, I think even though my family was very warm and loving, and I just like I'm grateful for that and want to say that. I also grew up, going to a suburban public high school where I was definitely one of the weirdos, and that was, and I saw a lot of hypocrisy around me. I mean, I was not at like one of those like thoughtful schools where the administrators are like, how can we make this? It was just, I was sort of trapped in a system. And there were definitely great teachers, for sure. Like the art teacher made her room the hideaway for all of the freaks, and she would always get in trouble with the administration. And I've never stopped identifying with that.
Yeah, and you're you're a grown woman, you have children, and I'm actually a lot older than you are, and the exuberance of and the power that comes from an act of rebellion and the delight in finding it in the Torah is actually defines a certain community, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And to me, I mean, I think that part of where I live in the world of religion is that I think religion in itself is can be this incredibly powerful. I think true spiritual inquiry can be powerfully destabilizing and rebellious, because you're looking for a reality that's behind the reality that we see, and you never quite know what you're gonna find there. You might have to like leave your homeland and hear this voice and leave your homeland and go off. You might have to wrestle with the voice that you hear. I mean, I think that like true spiritual engagement for me is not about following laws. It's about engaging profoundly with a tradition. And following laws can be part of that. Participating in rituals is certainly part of that.
But you find you find the squishy parts, you find where the trapdoor opens very often in the tradition. And that's there's a terror and an exhilaration in that. I love that point, that there are these moments you don't know what will happen next in the Torah. You don't know what crazy thing will be asked of you.
Right. And in Hasidic thought, I mean, like the Hasidic masters were wild. It's amazing to read them.
Yes. So you are, and I could see this partly in reading the book, the books should always speak for themselves, but sometimes one is lucky and one gets to talk to the poet about them. One feels both in this poetry that fascination and that openness to the tradition, however archaic, bizarre, and misogynistic, if that's what it comes to us from the past, and at the same time a probing attention to where things move. It's quite wonderful. I have another similar question, but I think may take us in another direction, and then maybe I'll just open it up. There may be other questions. If there aren't, I might ask another one. We'll see. School, and you've already said that a few things about yourself as a teacher, but there's so much about teaching in this book. It's called Divinity School. There's a poem called Sunday School. There's a poem called At the School for Young Unicorns. There's a poem called How to Graduate. There's a poem called The Separation Course, right? So you get the theme. There's a lot of, there's a poem that is about school called The Magic, where the speaker teaches girls to put on makeup in a basement. And so I wonder, what is all this stuff about school? Why is school important? And school is different from an encounter with a mystical tradition.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah.
Or maybe it's not different. You can tell me, no, it's not. It is,
Well, I think that school can be both, I think. And I think, in my high school that I was mentioning, I experienced both. So there was sort of the radical power of this art teacher who would just year after year open students' eyes to art and to free thinking and critical thinking. And then there was a sort of oppressive system of schooling that was like, read this incredible play by Shakespeare and then like reduce it to these 5 terrible plot questions, and that's like the takeaway of whether you get an A or not. So I think I have a similar relationship to school as I do to religious tradition, where I'm fascinated by the pedagogical ability to transcend time and to transcend the human, like the membrane between us. Like I think another place the book lives is the place where 2 people meet. Yes. How do I encounter you? We're separate, but there is a way, like right now we're having this conversation, this transaction, and where is the point where we meet? That's a question I ask a lot in the book. And
love is a kind of school.
And love is a kind of
there's
school.
Some very
Absolutely.
erotic poems here.
Yeah, and everything to me is school in the deepest sense, I think. And that's one of the things I liked about the phrase Divinity School, which I never attended, but I've always loved that phrase because it sounds like you go to Divinity School to learn to be divine. And
you need you really need good makeup for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and to me maybe that's life. Like maybe that is what we're doing here. Like maybe life is Divinity School. We are like studying the divine and studying what the people before us thought about it and taught us about it, and we're integrating that with our experience and rejecting some and creating some new stuff, and then we turn around and we become the teachers and the bridge to the future generations who are going to have their own feelings about what we're doing now.
That was lovely. I want to ask at least one question that's it's just about you as an American poet. You've studied both Appalachian fiddling, and you have an MFA, and you studied poetry. I know this connects with the theme of school. You studied at Columbia, and you studied with Kenneth Koch, mm-hmm. one of your teachers. Mm-hmm. You have a number of teachers. We discussed some of them before, teachers, mentors, other poets you learn from. But I'm wondering if you could just reflect a little bit on Koch. Some of you all might know him, some of you might not. He's wildly funny and tender. Mm-hmm. And I don't see, and you said to me that he was important for you, except for in one poem where you say, oh, something.
I got her, yeah.
That's
kind of a dirty one, but it's
It's kind of a dirty one? Yeah, there's some dirty ones. Which one were you?
It's How You Came to Be.
It's early, right?
Here, let's see.
How You Came to Be.
Yeah.
Oh, my daughter, look! Right, there's this sort of, recitative of...
Yeah. Well, for those of you who don't know Kenneth Koch, he passed away, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, but he was a poet of the New York School, and the New York School was like, I think he actually went to Harvard.
He did.
Yeah. And the New York School were highly erudite, and they really knew their Latin poets and their American poetry history and their English poetry history, but they were also super informal, super playful, incredibly down to earth, and they loved to write about their own lives. And that was one of their big innovations. They thought their daily lives were worth writing about just like anything else, just like love and death, like Frank O'Hara wrote about having a Coke with you. So
Frank O'Hara was Kenneth Koch's friend. They hung out together at Harvard.
Yeah, he was another major guy, and Allen Ginsberg is got a little more famous, but was from that same circle, and John Ashbery. So, I was very serious about poetry at a young age. I don't know where it came from, but I loved writing, and I wanted to be a poet when I grew up, even though I didn't really know any professional poets or what that meant. And so I got to Barnard to study English, and I took poetry classes, and I took Kenneth's class, and he was basically like, stop taking yourself so seriously. And it was really huge for me because that was sort of his whole, he was very jovial, very, avuncular, very loving, and he just refused to get heavy about anything, and yet he had this profound respect and love for the poetic tradition. So very learned and very unorthodox at the same time. And that was a huge influence on me. So suddenly I stopped making every poem, this trying to make them a gem that would sort of end in this really beautiful way and shift the whole thing so suddenly you understood it was about love or something like that. And I just started writing about my daily life, and I think that's a huge influence throughout the book for sure.
And which poem, when you think about Coke, is there a poem in this book that you...
reading those Earthroom Man poems.
Oh, thank you.
I really
for
think about
reminding me.
him.
Because, hello, dear Earthroom Man.
I'm just talking directly. They did a lot of addressing directly and poems that made people laugh, which was not always happening at poetry readings, And I really appreciate, by the way, your willingness to laugh, because I wanted it to be somewhat funny. Obviously, it's not humorous poetry overall, but those flashes of humor in there are important to me as I'm writing, and it's really gratifying when that comes through in a live setting.
In that poem, there's a playful voice and a young voice, right? A child's voice, and I think that's when I was exploring with you the girls in trouble thing. That's part of your. Of the persona here. Sometimes we get the voice of mature wisdom that comes to us from the ages, but that spectrum between maturity and immaturity, and I have a lot to learn, where Molly, I can learn from Molly, who says, what? That, and it's actually a great Jewish tradition. There's there are a bunch of writers, and I would count Philip Roth among them, who celebrate immaturity, right? Remaining perpetually ready to be sort of impertinent and obnoxious, which you are not in the Earthroom poem at all. Can I share my misapprehension about that poem?
Sure. I just want to say also, I think that's the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind. So I think that's something that, across traditions, there's something about being young that we don't necessarily want to lose all the way. Yeah.
Yes, that you bring innocence to an experience. So you all have been given the backstory to the Earthroom poem. I had not until I talked to Alicia over the weekend. And I thought it was one of the most powerful and scary poems about death and about imagining oneself into the soft earth of that grave. And then Alicia told me, oh, well, yeah, but it's really about this Earthroom, this exhibit in Soho.
Which I was walking on my way to go give the guy my book when we talked on the phone. It's kind of amazing.
Oh, you were?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I mean, that it's an amazing, amazing poem. But it has that combination of we are talking serious business, we're doing time travel, we are imagining ourselves into a post-mortal place, just as we, discern from afar the weird breath of the ancients, right? We're crossing that, and all of the gravity of that is in this poem, but also all the humor, right? This is Kenneth Koch telling you in a way, don't take yourself so seriously. And it's a marvelous marriage.
Thanks.
So that, I think, is probably enough chat.
Yeah.
Between us, but I think Alicia's probably not too tired to answer a few questions if you have them.
This is amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your music background. I mean, you play 12 instruments and you sing, and I'm just kind of curious when that all happened, and also if there was a particular moment when you decided to sort of combine your more scholarly Torah work with your music.
Yes. I'll start with answer 2, which is I was doing a master's in Jewish Women's and Gender Studies at JTS in New York, and it came time, I was studying women and music in Midrash, in Jewish legend, and I, stumbled on all these amazing stories, and I really loved them, and then it came time for me to write my thesis, and I was kind of dragging my feet, and my advisor, Dr. Bert Vysotsky, noticed that I was kind of uncharacteristically not doing my work, and he sat me down. He had seen me play a bunch downtown. He's like, I have an idea. I can see you don't really want to write a paper, so why don't you write songs based on your research and annotate them with all the sources, so it's not, getting out of it, but write 4 or 5 songs, and I will advocate for that to be your master's thesis. So that is how Girls in Trouble started, because then a friend who had a Jewish music label was like, oh, write a few more and we'll put them out as like a little boutique coffee table thing that like 100 people might buy. And then I recorded it and he was like, ooh, that's sort of marketable, that's weird. So then we just turned it into a normal kind of music project in a way. And the first part of your question, does anyone here know the Phil Donahue show? It was like a talk show. Yeah.
Sure.
So my mom was watching that when I was 3, and he had a Suzuki violin episode, and she was like, well, that looks like a good idea. So she brought me down to the local Suzuki branch, and I started playing classical violin. But I grew up in the same class as like true prodigies who literally went on, this woman, Hilary Hahn, who went on to win a classical Grammy at like 25. So I always knew I didn't want to practice 8 hours a day. I didn't want to be a classical musician, but I loved music. And so also in college, I stumbled on a guy in Union Square who was playing fiddle music on the street, and I was like, that's it. Like it's sort of this non-professional way of just having music in a daily context without having to practice all the time. So I befriended him and started to learn. And one thing led to, like, different genres led to each other. And now part of the fun of this is that because it's sort of a concept project, I can weave in my years as a klezmer punk musician and my years as a folk musician, and my classical training and composition training, and I can bring them all together in Girls in Trouble. Yeah. Have you done slam poetry at all? Not at all. No, the question was, have I done slam poetry? And I mean, I really consider myself like a poet on the page. It's been really fun giving readings. I think it's just after so many years of playing music, I think I like have an affect that doesn't feel as much like a formal poetry reading. But I really write for. I write poems that are meant to be certainly heard out loud, but primarily probably experienced on the page. And I do not like mixing competition and poetry. It makes me so nervous, because like the part of me that's a poet is the most vulnerable little like flame in the center of my heart, And to think about like then people are gonna like hold up numbers. I can't even go to slam like poetry things because it makes me so nervous for everyone. I just want to be in a place where everyone's like 10 because you tried. 10. That's true. Yeah, and I have a lot of respect for that tradition. I mean, I really, really do. But it's not where I come out of. But it makes poetry accessible in a different way, which I think it's a profoundly important version of poetry, or like corner of the poetry world, and certainly just as important as, the written page. It's just not where I live.
Because you're performers, you have the performance aspect of your music and then poems. So.
Yeah. The place they come together for me is in this rock opera about Bernie Madoff, where I wrote the script and I perform it and I play, and there's animation behind me. So that's like the one place they all meet up.
Just right here.
Yeah.
You make it sound like you're so, I don't know, like lucky or spirit. You just like stumble in accidentally to each inspiration. Is that true? I mean, what do you have words of wisdom for, like, I don't know, just
those of us who struggle
to find the pleasure? And
do I sound like I don't struggle? Oh,
yeah,
no.
You tell it in a fun way.
Thanks.
And I guess I'm just.
It's in retrospect.
Yeah.
It's fun in retrospect.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how do you think about the future? Like the what's a.
I mean, I have always been somewhat masochistically drawn towards what I fear most. So my experience of like entering each of these things is like a lot of struggle and fear. And I mean, the first 3 years that I was a front woman for a band, I would basically like not be able to do anything the entire day because I was so nervous all day, because I was like, I'm not a performer. I mean, I wasn't a theater kid. I'm like kind of shy and introverted. And then after 5 years of it, I was like, okay, maybe I can kind of do this. So I'm definitely like a believer in make the road by walking. And I definitely do not experience a lot of joy in like my early stages of especially trying new creative things. It's sort of agonizing for me, but then I just have to like let myself catch up and sort of have a long view. And I mean, 2 things that have really helped me are the motto, never better done than perfect. which I read in the New Yorker hangs on the wall at Facebook, and I'm like, I'm going to carry that with me. And I say it to myself like 10 times a day. I'm just like, you know what? There's all these imperfections about what I'm doing, but I'm doing it. And I just like have a little cheering section in my head saying, better done than perfect. I think my own spiritual practices come in response to my own kind of like, anxiety and struggles, and that I think is a positive thing, that like the deeper I go into my own vulnerabilities and fear, the more I find like a really rooted, grounded way to live. I mean, I'm 38 now, so it's a constant thing. But I'm definitely, this is like, me talking in retrospect about my past, and if you talk to me tomorrow about my future, I'll be like really excited and kind of anxious. Yeah. I've been asked this question a few times, and I kept answering and feeling weird about it, and then I realized it's because I have a 1.5-year-old and a 3.5-year-old, and I'm so early in it that I feel weird about I keep being like, it's crazy, it's so crazy, and I know that when they're 7 and 9, it'll be different. So I feel like that my experience of early parenthood is really crazy, and just like learning to live with a level of chaos. I generally like chaos, actually, I thought, but it turns out that there's more chaos than I can deal with. So kind of coming up against my own limits over and over of chaos or lack of control over my surroundings, or my own patience, my own compassion, seeing parts of myself that I don't like is, to me, really part of like what this woman was asking, where I'm in the thick of that process, and I'm always grateful to be pushed. Like I experience that as a form of spiritual instruction, and certainly my children are my teachers. And I also, the joy and the sort of long-term vision that comes from imagining them as adults and then their kids, and then, I think that it's only deepened my psychedelic sense of time and of the preciousness of any moment, and of being like definitely more fully present, especially with little kids who can do nothing else. So I'm learning that. I think my second book is all about like pregnancy, birth, and motherhood, none of which went exactly like I thought it would. So
I was just curious, have you been able to discern or imagine enough darkness in the Song of Songs to write from the woman's perspective?
That's a really nice question. The Song of Songs, so is there a Girls in Trouble song about that one, you mean?
Might there be? Or?
I'll take that as a commission. I will say there is a level of darkness which I don't want to address. So like Lot's daughters, there are stories where terrible things happen to women, and I'm like, I don't want to write a beautiful song about a truly horrible thing. So I talk a big talk about like the dark moments, but really there's a point at which I think they're beyond redemption. They're just horrible stories, but it's the in-between things that reflect aspects of what I can really relate to. And it's not all the negative ones. There's love songs and positive ones in there, but a lot of my songs are because someone asked for a song, so it's on my list now.
Thank you all. And
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa.
And Aaron. Where's
Thanks,
Aaron?
Jonah.
Where'd Aaron go? Oh.
Where?
No, I'm sorry. I'm
Okay,
having a...
and I'm going to go sit by in the back by Aaron. Can we have another hand for Aaron, who really makes it all happen? So feel free to come up and say hi, ask me any questions you were too shy to ask.
You're signing books, right? Yeah, great.